Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder, coming to you from our studio in downtown Toronto. Ontario's alcohol distribution system has come under heavy scrutiny lately. On this edition of The Point, we'll talk to Toronto Star columnist Martin Regg Cohn, who broke the story on the beer store's secret monopoly deal. And we'll talk to Restaurant Canada's James Rillet on how government policies have impacted the hospitality industry. All that and more on this edition of The Point. Ontario's beer sales and distribution are in the hands of 3 foreign breweries. They handle nearly 80% of all beer sales in the province. Until recently, the public didn't know of a secret deal between the brewers and the LCBO to keep a key product exclusively in their hands. That was until Toronto Star columnist Martin Regg Cohn unearthed a document detailing the arrangement that prevents government-owned LCBO from selling the popular 2-4s. To discuss this and what's in store for consumers as this issue unfolds is Toronto Star columnist Martin Regg Cohn. Martin, you've been following the issue of alcohol sales, both the beer store and the wines and the LCBO, for a while. What motivated you to get into this area?
It was actually more of a convergence of public policy and looking behind the scenes at what makes government run. I was just fascinated that everybody in this province seemed to either misunderstand or deeply resent the beer store. They didn't know how it worked, and they didn't understand why it worked that way, why there was this monopoly or quasi-monopoly. So I set out a couple of years ago to really explore it and explain to people how it came about, why it was persisting after all these years, 90 or so years, and maybe suggest some ways of digging ourselves out of this rut on beer. Wine is more complicated, but beer attracted me because there's such a simple, straightforward remedy to a very complicated industry and behind-the-scenes lobbying setup.
So I'll get into the simple remedy, but a lot of people still have the misconception that the beer store is a government-controlled or run agency, when in fact it's not. Can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. The reason people assume that is because it looks like a government monopoly, it smells like a government monopoly, it acts like a government monopoly. It's so old-fashioned, so frozen in time, so 1950s, so Soviet, that everyone would normally assume that it is a government-owned monopoly. The paradox is that the LCBO has actually changed with the times, and the LCBO is fully government-owned. It does have a monopoly for the most part on wine and sells beer as well in some limited quantities. But the beer store is in fact privately owned, always has been. What's made the beer store more interesting and a bigger target is that its owners have in fact changed their own ownership. So Labatt's, Molson's, Sleeman's were the owners for many years. Then about 10 or 15 years ago, with globalization and consolidation, they became foreign-owned. So Labatt is Brazilian-owned, Molson is American-owned, and Sleeman is Japanese-owned. And so you have 3 foreign beer brewing conglomerates running our own monopoly, quasi-monopoly in Ontario. That's crazy.
Now, the beer stores say that they basically run it at cost and that their system is more efficient because it's one distribution center and they're able to then, have efficiencies that provide, better service to consumers. In fact, it's almost somewhat the opposite, isn't it?
Well, the beer store likes to say, when it's trying to attract public opinion, that it's a not-for-profit operation. It's a break-even operation. In the same way that the National Football League claims that it's also a not-for-profit operation. It just sends the money back to its owners. So technically, the beer store attempts at year-end to reconcile its figures, profits and losses, expenses and costs and incoming revenue, and says, hey, we're at zero. And they remit that money to the owners through lower fees for the owners. So there's a complicated way to do it, but it's just no one thinks that the NFL owners are a profit-free public service. The beer store isn't either. The beer store's first priority is enrichment of its owners and shareholders, not public service. And we see that in the way the beer store operates its retail function. Yes, it's efficient in terms of the way it delivers beer because it spends almost no money or very little money in its retail operations. It hasn't improved, it hasn't kept up with the times. Display and browsing have lagged compared to how the LCBO operates. So yes, it's a low-cost operation, but do beer drinkers benefit from those lower costs? No. I think there's a lot of argument about what the price of beer is like in Ontario and how that compares to other provinces in the rest of the world. It's more or less the same. There are differences here and there between BC and Quebec, but there are not great cost savings in Ontario.
The retail price is roughly the same. But then you factor in the beer store's monopoly, and what ends up happening is a lot of money ends up coming back to those producers.
Well, the prices are the same, as you say. The costs, as you point out, are much lower because they are more efficient than Quebec or elsewhere. There's one centralized delivery and warehousing system. So low costs, same prices, much higher profits, much higher gross margins than they have in any other province or anywhere else, probably in the Western world. That's an enormously profitable enterprise for the owners, and those profits flow overseas.
Now, there was a study done that I read about that compared the amount of money that the government gets from alcohol sales, both from the LCBO and from the brewers, and compares that to other provinces, in this case Saskatchewan. And the per capita amount is almost twice as much or 3 times as much in Saskatchewan, which if you extrapolate it, means that the Ontario government, which is cash-strapped, is losing close to $1 billion on alcohol sales.
Well, there's no question that there is a rent, a profit, an imputed profit, a built-in profit that the beer owners, the big brewers, are capturing. And I think Ed Clark has isolated that and argued that there ought to be a franchise fee that the beer store should pay for the privilege of having roughly 80% of the beer market historically in this province. So there is an opportunity to capture that, and also a recognition that for years, hundreds of millions of dollars have been flowing out of the province. This is money that should have been going to the provincial treasury to pay for hospitals, schools, roads, policing, instead of enriching foreign brewers.
Both on the beer, on the wines, and I guess to some extent also the spirits, because we do have Canadian spirit manufacturers here. How are consumers being helped or hurt by government policies?
Well, I think the consumer was an afterthought for a long time, for decades. And it was all about protecting industry, protecting people who had the ear of government, and no one was really listening to consumers or speaking for them. I think initially Ed Clark, who has looking at this asset review, which includes looking at the LCBO and trying to get more money from for the government, also approached it from the lens of how can we raise more revenues? How can we extract more money from the breweries? And maybe we can look at the wine people, but that was not a priority at the outset. I think there was a recognition later on, and I certainly argued this to Mr. Clark in columns and in person, that, hey, you come from a retail background. At TD Bank and at Canada Trust, you were not the top-down guy, allegedly. You were the person who looked at the person in the bank branch and wondering why they had to wait in line so long, just like people wait in line at the beer store to return their bottles. So in his interim report, he was just trying to get a franchise fee, and he was going to say, he said, well, let's allow the LCBO to sell 12-packs, but still not 2-4s. Cases of 24, Marcel. 2-4 is a case of 24.
Thank you for clarifying that.
The 2-4s were still going to remain exclusively in the ambit of the beer store. They have this secret deal that they've had since 2000 where only the beer store could sell 2-4s. Clark said, let's go halfway and allow 12-packs. That's crazy. There's no reason to protect the beer store's monopoly on cases of 24 if people want to buy in the government-owned LCBO. In the last few months, there's been a change in approach by Ed Clark and the government where they have thought more about accessibility, not just profitability, but customer convenience. And so now they're looking at allowing supermarkets to have the privilege, a certain number of supermarkets, to get a license, to bid on a license, and be able to sell beer and wine, separate license, in supermarkets.
So I'm told that companies like Loblaws are already looking at creating their own President's Choice beer that will be available in certain stores, and it would foster competition, and the retail giants like Loblaws, Walmart, etc., have distribution capabilities that rival the beer stores and would provide for more access to consumers and potentially add more profits and revenues to the government.
Well, and Costco is the biggest retailer of wine and beer, I believe, in the United States. Yeah. The LCBO is the biggest distributor of wine in the world, more or less. So there is an opportunity for supermarkets to get in. They are very good at retailing. Their margins are very low. They do it very well in Quebec. There's been a lot of propaganda by the beer store that nobody else can be trusted, neither convenience stores nor supermarkets, to check IDs and so on. And you have to ask yourself, well, why then do the owners of the beer store, these big brewers, Molson and Labatt's, sell to convenience stores and supermarkets in Quebec? I can buy beer at a Loblaws in Quebec, Provigo now, but not in Ontario. So that's coming. It's inevitable.
So the Treasurer will be delivering his budget very shortly, in a couple of weeks, and we'll find out which direction the province goes. Hope we'll be able to have you back to see where it all shakes out.
We'll raise a glass.
We'll raise a glass. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome.
Up next, beer isn't the only issue that is being discussed when it comes to alcohol sales and distribution. We'll talk to James Rillet from Restaurants Canada about wine, beer, and spirit sales in licensed establishments. The Liquor Control Board of Ontario traces its roots back to the temperance and prohibition era. In an attempt to satisfy public concerns, the government of the day established the LCBO. The board was designed to deliver money to the Treasury and regulate sales of alcohol to public and licensed establishments. Fast forward to today, and the LCBO pours in billions of dollars in profits to the government coffers. It maintains over 600 stores, as well as supplying nearly 17,000 licensed establishments across the province. While the LCBO has modernized its operations to keep up with the times, there are critics of the government-controlled monopoly that believe that the LCBO no longer serves a purpose. Joining me is James Rillet, Vice President Ontario for Restaurant Canada, to discuss what's wrong with the LCBO and what we should be doing about it. James, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So in your opinion, what's the problem with the LCBO's current system as it affects both your constituents in the restaurant and licensed establishments, as well as the public?
Well, the biggest problem we have is the unique Ontario system, where you have a separate beer system and a separate liquor system. That's rarely seen anywhere. What happens is, because the LCBO has a secret deal to, well, not so secret now, to only sell beer in the beer store, our members can't buy at the LCBO. Now, the LCBO sells to our members at list price, and the beer store actually sells, believe it or not, to our members at 30 to 50% more than you would pay yourself.
So I was reading somewhere that a case of beer on average is $30 at the beer store, and you have to pay close to $45 for a case?
Yeah, that's the worst case scenario is with Labatt Blue. It's $30 for an individual and $45 for members. For most others, it ranges around $10 more, about 30%, but it's fairly significant when you're running a business.
So how do they justify that the average consumer can go into a beer store, pick up a case, bring it home, and then they go to their local establishment to watch a hockey game or a baseball game, and they're paying 50% markup just for getting the product to your stores or to your restaurants?
I've never heard a good justification of it. Most of the beer companies simply say we don't discuss pricing. So they've never even answered to us as to why that is. It goes against every business policy that anyone knows, and well, I can't understand it.
So how does that impact on your members, on the restaurateurs, the licensed establishments, when they're paying that type of markup?
Well, it mostly affects independents that they don't have the ability to find other ways to make up for that lost revenue. They're cutting back hours. They're doing other things to try and economize. And it's significant money, especially for a small business. Even on this low scale, if you're going through, well, for example, if you go through 100 cases of beer a week, it would cost you about $1,000 out of your profit margin every week. So that's the additional cost.
In other industries, in the food industry, for example, you can get a discount on bulk purchases. So if you're buying thousands of dollars worth of a product, usually the company will give you a break on it, so you can then mark it up, and that's your margin on that. How does that work in alcohol sales? Do you have that same ability to buy in bulk?
No, it doesn't matter how much you buy. You pay the same price. Most provinces give us a volume or a discount for a licensee discount. It's called. We don't get that in liquor sales in Ontario. In LCBO, we pay the same price as list price, but in beer store we pay more than list.
So there's really no inherent advantage in anything that the government is offering to consumers through purchasing alcohol in a licensed establishment in Ontario.
No, there's not. There's no encouragement of small business. There's no encouragement to help business flourish in Ontario.
So what are the Restaurants Canada doing to try and persuade the government to take a different approach on this?
Well, we've met with Ed Clark. We've asked him to two things. We've asked him to get rid of the deal that doesn't allow us to buy product in LCBOs. We think that's the quickest thing that we can do to ensure that our price comes under control. Secondly, we've asked him to allow us to buy from craft beer, allow craft beers to sell their beer together. So one of the biggest problems, our members love craft beer. They love to supply it. One of the biggest problems is if you have 12 different craft beers, you have to have 12 different deliveries. So if there was a change so that we could have one delivery, that would help a lot. Now,
I was reading that a licensed establishment has to go through 9 different steps in order to place an order and get it delivered. And even the delivery, sometimes they have to go pick it up from the central warehouse from the LCBO.
Yeah, it depends on the product. If you're ordering a product that they don't usually stock, it is very complicated. It's complex. It's also complex for new product. People that create a new product or want to import a new product, because you have to find somebody to care, an agent. So they make it complex to both buy and to create new product.
So a lot of restaurants, one of the things that distinguishes them is their wine list, and it's a competitive advantage having different wines that you can't get at the LCBO or you can't get on your own. How difficult it is for a restaurant to have that type of selection available for consumers?
It depends. If it's an established agent, it's fairly straightforward. But if it's a wine that's not usually carried or that the LCBO doesn't have an experience with, it can be very complicated. They have to test them, etc. And one operator that I've talked to like to go to wine auctions where they buy special brands, special years, just to have the best available. And it's very hard for them to do that.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the overall system, some people compare it to the old Stalinist regime where you're only allowed to purchase the items that the government approves. And that's why the large companies, the Labatt's, the Molsons, etc., have such a dominant position, is because they've been inherent in Ontario for all these years.
On the restaurant side, it's a combination. Like, first of all, the top brands also dominate in the restaurant industry and in the bar industry, mainly because of advertisement. And our members aren't usually there to sell a certain kind of beer. They just sell whatever the customer asks for. We are seeing a lot more now where better restaurants are pairing different beers, especially with different meals. So people are getting introduced to a lot of beers they normally wouldn't taste, and wines and ciders as getting popular. So we always look at ourselves as the first step to introducing new product to people, because you might not buy a case of it in the beer store, but you might try a bottle of it in your local bar if it's suggested by the bartender.
In 2005, the Dalton McGuinty government established a task force to look at alcohol sales in the province. And one of the recommendations that they submitted to then Treasurer Greg Sabera was to privatize the LCBO. And the McGuinty government didn't feel that was something, and then they shelved the report. What are your thoughts on privatized beer and alcohol sales?
Mostly I think that would affect mostly on the retail side. The effect that it would have on us if the distribution was privatized. I think there's a lot of distribution chains. We have lots of large companies that supplied our restaurants, and as I said earlier, the fewer times you have to have somebody to receive a delivery, the better. So if those could be merged, that would be great. But I think on the distribution side, it would especially help our members.
So if you've been meeting with Ed Clark, and he's been trying to maximize provincial assets, and the LCBO is one of the ones that he's looking at, and he's to some degree talk also about the beer store. What recommendations have you made to Clark Commission?
Well, we made three recommendations, as I mentioned earlier. One was to have our members buy product, all sizes of beer at the LCBO. That would both lower our price, and it would provide better convenience. We've asked him for co-distribution with craft beers. We think that would help them, and it would also help us. We've also asked him for something called off sales, which a lot of other provinces have, which you can buy, especially craft products, at a bar. We think that would be a great addition, and it's something that our members already have staff that are trained. Our members have security. They have all the ability to sell alcohol anyway, so it's just the next logical step.
Well, it sounds like with the patio season upon us, there are a lot of options, and hopefully we'll see some of those coming in the spring budget that the minister is going to be delivering shortly. I'm joined by James Rillet from Restaurants Canada. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Marcel.
We'll be back with The Point. With the good weather just around the corner, many people will be looking forward to visiting their favorite patio to enjoy their beverage of choice. For decades, Ontarians have been limited on what they can buy and where they can purchase them. In a system that will warm the hearts of any Kremlinologist, Ontario fosters a system that restricts choice to a small selection of state-approved items. Add that to the beer store monopoly, and it's a wonder that consumers haven't launched a revolution. But change may be at hand. Revelations of the secret deal between the foreign-controlled beer stores have them running for cover. And questions have been raised about the cozy deal that Constellation Brands, the world's largest wine company, and Peller Estates have to sell their products in company-owned retail stores. All this has led to talks that Ontario will finally allow sales of alcohol in large-format grocery stores like Costco, Walmart, and Loblaw superstores. While Ontario consumers have been shelling out billions to prop up an antiquated system, there's no question that the province needs the money to fund schools, hospitals, and highways. Ontarians look outside their borders and see a choice and competitive pricing structure that still brings in money to state and provincial governments. In one study comparing the government-controlled system in Saskatchewan to the LCBO, it identified that the Ontario system is allowing $1 billion to flow through government fingers to private, mostly foreign-owned companies based on per capita sales annually. As the Berlin Wall fell decades ago, marking the end of communism, the province needs to modernize the sale and distribution of alcohol. If something doesn't happen soon, we may see a revolution take place in Ontario. And that's the point. That's all for this edition of The Point. Follow us on Twitter at WatchThePoint, like us on Facebook, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Marcel Wieder. Thank you for joining us.